Hello everyone, my name is Chris and welcome to this episode on World Crypto Network called Art and Bitcoin. Today I'm joined by Rob Myers from Vancouver, who describes
Hi.
himself as an artist and hacker. Introduce yourself, Rob.
Hi.
Hello. And I'm also joined by Marguerite, aka Coin Artist on Twitter. Hello.
Hello.
And today's episode was really brought about after a conversation that Marguerite and I had the other day about the influence of artists in a technical space. The word technology actually comes from the Greek word techne, which actually means art. And every great civilization in history has had to have its artists in order for it to be considered a thriving civilization. But one of the things that I firmly believe, particularly with the introduction of Google and Facebook and the surveillance state, is that these institutions don't represent the beginning of something, they represent the end, namely the representation of the end of the industrial era, the final automation, the automation of our relationships and our connections. What's really scarce right now is trust. And I think one of the things that we've seen with the introduction of the blockchain technology is just how much trust really means to us and what it can really do to help us gain better connectivity offline. Like we actually go on the internet in order to get off the internet in order to discover who we really want to be with. So Rob, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about your work? Because I was checking out your website earlier. It looks like you've got a lot of really interesting stuff going on there.
Thank you. I mean, my current work with cryptocurrencies doesn't go back very far. I got really interested in it last year when sort of the popularity of Bitcoin in particular wasn't going away, and all the people I was looking to for criticisms of the underlying ideas of cryptocurrency, so the science fiction authors, the sort of art critics who are usually quite politically informed in a strange way, weren't coming up with viable objections to the underlying ideas. They were coming up with sort of almost moral panics about the perceived political agenda of cryptocurrency, and they were coming up with sort of fairly obvious flaws in some of the underlying implementation details, but nothing fundamental about the idea of the sort of massively distributed, cryptographically underwritten currency was being shown to be flawed. So this interested me because as an artist who works with technology and has worked with technology for some time now, when something fundamental changes in technology, that draws me in. So I started working with trying to engage with the underlying technology of Bitcoin, which is the blockchain. So the most fundamental representation, scientifically speaking, of someone's self is at the moment their genome, following the Human Genome Project. So as I got my genome analysed a few years ago by 23andMe for a previous project, I thought the best way of proving my own existence using the blockchain's proof of existence mechanism is
So, so let me just come in there. So
work.
you used a service called 23andMe, which is a genome tracking project where you can actually get some insight into your DNA. And many people consider DNA to be the original blockchain, right? Like that's the wetware. And
Yes, yeah,
you have cryptographically signed created a SHA-1 hash or
yes,
SHA-256 hash of this, and then you've put that hash into the Bitcoin blockchain in order to prove its existence.
yes, yeah. Because the one of the things that appeals to me about the blockchain is it's this vast proof of consensus. It's hundreds of thousands of computers across the internet put into motion by hundreds of thousands of people, all proving the value of proof that blockchain uses that this is the current state of the information that's been placed into the blockchain. The human genome is information. I mean, everything's regarded as information now, but the human genome is a very, very long piece of information. And so, sort of these ideas which have slightly different meanings in different domains, like identity, like information, like proof, I just like the way that they can be brought together creatively and used to make art that can explore those ideas. So I didn't place my entire genome into the blockchain because that would have horrendously bloated the blockchain and sort of added another gigabyte to it, which would have made me very popular. But the SHA-256 hash my genome is a fairly good proof that I'm a unique individual who does currently exist. And as of the blockchain block that's placed into, I can now prove that someone with the same genome as me existed, and that's probably me.
So, Marguerite, what do you find so interesting about this? I mean, one of the things that really occurs to me is that people are actually using the blockchain as a canvas on which they can put a lot of the valuable information in order for it to exist throughout time, because this blockchain is going to be distributed all over the world on millions of people's computers. It will be very, very difficult for this to ever go away.
Right. But I also like how he's thinking about it abstractly. He's taking the idea. A lot of times, people in this space, there's a certain amount of people that just think about Bitcoin as currency. So he's thinking. So he's thinking that abstractly about the idea of the blockchain as being a tool for artists. We're taking it to another level because I think that's the future of the technology. And yes, we don't understand the DNA is nature's blockchain. We don't understand it because we're not nature. We didn't create it. We can't decipher it just yet. We don't have the tools to do that. And the blockchain is something that we can do and we can make abstract. So Rob is one of the first artists I've come across that is doing this, and I'm very interested in what he's doing. He's doing things with Facecoin and MonkeyCoin that take ideas that we might see more so in the asset exchanges that are happening with the next exchange. And also, I know Rob's interested in color coins, and I'm not as familiar with how we can make those abstract artistic ideas to you. So I'm interested in hearing about that. But to start with, Facecoin, I'd like to hear where you know. I'm guessing that our viewers don't know about Facecoin.
Yeah,
so
let's
the
get it up.
ideas that like motivated you to get there, and then how you decided to get there.
So, the idea that carries over from the genome hashing into Facecoin is the idea of identity. With cryptographic currencies, you're not dealing with the unique identities of human beings. You're dealing with cryptographic key addresses. These are, for all intents and purposes, very long, very hard to fake phone numbers. And the trust that we spoke about earlier, that cryptocurrencies address the loss of in society. They don't do by rebuilding it, they do by obviating it, by making it so you don't need to trust someone to exchange information with them, and if that information happens to take the form of money or value exchanges, then that's great, you can do that without any particular need to trust them. With the idea of identity, you get the idea of identity politics, the idea of people's unique identity, which is very much not the idea of identity that you have to work with on the blockchain. And I liked the gap between those two concepts of identity. I also liked the way that blockchain technology and distributed currency technology is being used to do useful work. The Bitcoin blockchain is actually based on an algorithm which, as part of its operation, is designed specifically to waste an awful lot of computing power. The reason it does this is to prevent people who would use that computing power to make transactions and to use money or send money that they don't have. It's to prevent them being able to do so, because in order to do so, they would have to have more computing power to waste than the rest of the network combined, and that isn't going to happen. What does happen? Then we've got more serious problems. So with Facecoin, I liked the idea, rather than blockchain being used to do useless work in the case of Bitcoin, or to do useful work in the case of, for example, the systems that's being used to do medical research as the proof of work. I like the idea of taking that proof of work system and turning it into some sort of proof of artistic work. And rather than searching for strings of zeros in an algorithm or problems in genomes, using it to perform a very simple artistic task. Now, the most simple artistic task that people tend to do when they go around galleries is to look for faces and things. And so what Facecoin does is, rather than perform useless work or useful work, it performs artistic work by trying to find faces effectively in the clouds of data that make up a blockchain. So that belongs to an that belongs to a digital artistic tradition known as metapareidolia. Pareidolia is our propensity to find faces in clouds, to find faces wherever we look, because human survival, human social success, depends to a great degree on our ability to find and recognize faces. It's why electrical sockets look like faces. It's why when you look in the clouds, it's very easy to find a face. So, and when you look at a very noisy image sent back from a Mars probe, rather than seeing a bumpy mountain or an eroded crater, you see a face, probably prepared by ancient Martians. So it's the application or the misapplication of face recognition technology of the kind that's used in surveillance programs or that's used in cameras and phones to try and find how many people there are on a photo, or the Facebook uses to try and find your friends and tag them, but using it to find faces where in theory really faces don't exist.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting because one of the things about entropy, like the word entropy means inside the tropics, enter tropica, inside transformation. So it's constantly changing. We're constantly being bombarded by surprise. But in order for us to function effectively as a species in an ever-changing, ever-dynamic world, we need to have the right balance between surprise and expectation. So some of the things that have to happen need to be something that I can anticipate. Like as an entrepreneur, I can anticipate the demands in a market and hopefully provide a product or service that answers some of those demands. But I'm also going to be subjected to risk, and risk by its very nature is a distributed phenomena. What I find interesting about what you're doing is that you are actually providing an in-utility on the blockchain, right? There is no utility to what you're doing. You're just putting stuff on there. The whole vision originally was that it was a way of communicating and transferring value across geography in a way that was jurisdictionally irrelevant. Like it's geographically agnostic. It doesn't care where you are. It's jurisdictionally independent. That's the term I'm looking for. And it was a way, like money is a way for us to measure our sacrifice, right? What I want is a commodity. The word commodity, for anyone who doesn't know, is the word commodification, right? That you are both being changed by and changing the substance or the product that you are using. And it's important to remember that everything is technology, right? Like a pencil is technology. No one person knows how to make one. And it's important to remember that we have always been modern throughout all of time. So we must remember that when we talk about technology in the modern day. What we usually mean by technology now is like high technology. But one of the most interesting things you can do with technology is you can discover all these unanticipated use cases. You can have people that just come to the technology and they bring their own why. This has happened recently with Counterparty Mastercoin. I interviewed them the other day. It's happening also with Ethereum. Is that you've got a new wave of people coming into Bitcoin now that don't understand it the same way that Gavin Andreessen and Jeff Garzik and Luke Jr. and people like that, they came to it with the view that it was currency, and this is what it's meant to do. Now a new group of people come along and they bring their own ethic. They want to bring their own why. They start trying on a lot of this technology and they think, no, actually, I think it should be used like this. I think I want to use it in a very different way. I want to use this glass as a paperweight and not as something to drink water out of, for example. No? Marguerite, say something about that. I feel like you want to say something.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about Rob's ideas, and you say that doesn't have utility, but then again, it sort of does because it's acting as inspiration. He's implying on future technologies by what he's doing. I mean, this technology he's alluding to the idea that we can be using this with FaceCoin. It uses software to recognize the faces, right? And so in the future, not long from now, we're going to be using lots of software to be recognizing different pattern making within this space. And I think that he's addressing that already, and that's really young for the blockchain because we just started really getting into it and talking about Bitcoin, and here he is saying like, well, actually, when we have AI, we're going to be using it for all these purposes. And I could be wrong, but I feel like Rob, you're already touching on those topics.
Thank you. I mean, because you mentioned the idea of inutility, which I use as a sort of, that has a history of being a definition of what art is. Art is something that you can't use for anything else that must be art. And I tend to use it as a humorous definition, but it's certainly one that I work with. And what it does, though, is it does make that social space or that conceptual space where you can explore social or technological or whatever matters that are coming up without it being something that if it goes wrong, people won't be fed, or if it goes right, people will make a lot of money, but it won't be sort of for useful work. So art's not a safe space, but it's a space where you can get away with things that you can't in any other space. And one of those things is exploring very young technologies, which obviously have vast potential, that people are finding different uses for. I mean, when you were talking about Chris talking about people finding different uses for the blockchain, you've got stuff like Twister, which is applying to Twitter. You've got as Kate mentioned, the coloured coins and the asset registry, which is sort of bringing stocks and shares kind of technology to the blockchain. It's not exactly the street, but it's like the old William Gibson quote, "The street finds its own uses in technology," and this is a technology, and people are finding their own uses for it. And I think one of the good things about Bitcoin, the way it's created and released, is it doesn't preclude people making different uses of it. It gives people the tools, and obviously what it essentially works out with is the very appealing use case of using it for financial transactions. But there's no reason not to use it for something else, and the technology doesn't try to prevent people using something else.
Well, talk a little bit about what you've been doing with Ethereum, because I noticed on your website that you've got some smart contracts that you've been writing in, I think it's a language called Serpent, which I think is a little bit of play on words with the programming language Python. And it basically allows somebody to write a contract into a blockchain, and it then gets fueled by something called Ether, which is like the Bitcoin equivalent on the Ethereum network. And that they describe that, the guys at Ethereum describe that as like the oil, right, that makes the thing run. But what is so artistic about the stuff that you're doing on Ethereum?
I mean, Ethereum really interested me because it takes the underlying basis for Bitcoin, which is a contractual system. It's saying I am entering into the contract to transfer this many Bitcoins from myself to you. And in fact, Bitcoin does have a simple programming language built into the blockchain. That's how transactions are taken. And so Ethereum takes the simple but effective contract and scripting, so programming basis of the Bitcoin blockchain, and generalizes it. It makes it so that you can construct any particular contract you wish to, rather than simply a financial contract. And you can control that contract with effectively an arbitrary piece of code, so like a program which would do pretty much anything that you can do with data in the blockchain. So what interested me about that is I've come from a digital art background, a programming art background, and further back from that background, if you look at the 20th century artistic avant-garde, like conceptual art, like pop art, like people like Jeff Koons, then there's this thread of firstly engagement between art and money. Art's value is sometimes represented by money.
So sorry, so can you say again? Speak a bit louder. You're saying art and money, the relationship between art and money?
Art and money have a difficult relationship. On the one hand, you get someone like Jeff Koons, who in the 1980s was very deliberately pricing his artwork at a much higher level than an artist of his reputation at the time would have been expected to, in order to try and communicate something about the art, to say, my art has this social worth, my art should be moving in these artistic and institutional circles. And then you get the conceptual art movement, which has threads in there which are trying to completely destroy art as a monetizable commodity, trying to make art that effectively you cannot own. So you have those two extremes. On the one hand, art that is defined through a not straightforward relationship with money, a sort of playful or ironic relationship with money. And on the other hand, art which completely and utterly tries to refuse the existing economic systems.
And I suppose I'm going to just come in there, and I suppose what makes it so valuable is the fact that it's so hard to
Yeah,
engage in an activity that has no beneficial
yeah,
outcome to it,
yeah.
right?
And
That,
this is the problem. Lots of old conceptual art is now very collectible and very valuable because it's designed to be very resistant to that. So, yeah. But
yeah,
there's also art which sort of engages with the philosophy of actually what art is, and no small part of that relies on contracts. So if you have a piece of conceptual art, how do you own it? One of the ways is to have a certificate of authenticity, which is a piece of paper drawn up preferably by a lawyer, which says you may have this sort of balloon of air, but it's your balloon of air that you've paid for and it's come from this artist and it has this provenance. Artists have taken that further and made artworks which they've declared to not be artworks at particular times of day, or artworks which consist entirely of the language of a contract. So you accept the contract between the first and second parties, and so on and so on and so on, and the contract itself is the artwork. So I like Ethereum because it allows us to combine the digital art tradition of art that's made of or with code with the monetary and contractual traditions of avant-garde art in the 20th century. That all sounds very abstract. What it comes down to is there's a system here which allows us to bring together the critique of the political stance of cryptocurrency with the critique of the political stance of avant-garde art, and I think that's potentially a very fertile area for investigation.
I'm thinking about how initially Bitcoin was labeled an art, and was it Switzerland or Sweden? And I find that interesting because that was the form it was taking. So the fact that you're then creating these things that are considered artworks, and you say avant-garde because it is, a little bit outside of our minds is what art is. A lot of times we think about art as visual designs that are very much we can access them. But Bitcoin enters that realm, and the blockchain enters that realm of like inaccessible art, or art that we have to work to access and then conceive and understand. And you're adding those other layers that are already exist in artwork, but we're doing it in a way that is more abstract, and you're doing it through code, which is interesting because I think of art having the ability to be as powerful as code already as it is, but by doing it and breaking it down to such small pieces, and then it's just interesting because it's almost like we're going in both directions now in this new conversation about artwork, and I think it's breaking ground. So
it's for me, it speaks to two things. It speaks to the sustainability of the artist's craft, and it also speaks to the fact that I think that art should really leave you with something. Like the artist should be able to say things that the scientists and the politicians and all the other people can't. Like you're communicating in an entirely different way, because what motivates you and what your intention behind the whole endeavor is not to get any benefit. It's not to receive any utility directly, and yet it is a very selfish pursuit. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about Ethereum is that, in theory, the contract is never finished. What you're doing is you're leaving your intention somewhere. I mean, no contract is ever finished unless the contract stipulates a termination within itself. But in the UK, in English and Welsh law, a contract is binding even if it's spoken, right? Because you don't want to discriminate against people who can't read and write. So anything that's agreed, in fact, large corporations have to minute their meetings because anything that's just said in a meeting is legally binding. And I almost feel like, we kind of need something like that for everyday society. Now that the individual is becoming more sovereign and we have more power than we've ever had before, we've got more capabilities, it's easier to be discovered, the marginal costs of setting up a business from scratch is far, far reduced. We're going to need some of the same tools that large businesses and governments have always had as a way of managing the agreements between each other.
Yeah, and I mean, as I was saying earlier, art creates a space or a context in which we can look at that without waking up the next morning and find out we've entered into a binding contract with an unfortunate or unforeseen side effects. the nice thing about contracts on the Ethereum blockchain is they're smart contracts, so they can be triggered by events or information that's fed into the blockchain. And so you don't have to particularly rely on the people who entered into the contract in order to observe it, as long as they can set up some means of the information being fed in. The contract will carry on, as you say, regardless. And one of the applications of that that really interests me is Snowbo's idea of smart property, where the ownership of an actual physical real-world resource is represented by a contract, in this case on the Ethereum blockchain. So some of the examples that people have come up with already are using the Ethereum blockchain to keep track of who has access to a property that's rented out on Airbnb.
Say that again. Have access to what?
To a property that's rented out through one of the sort of sharing services like Airbnb.
Oh, great!
So you wire. I mean, the example they gave with it's called AirLock. You wire up the door to a Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi controls the lock and is connected to the Ethereum blockchain. So when you pay the correct amount of Ether, that goes onto the blockchain. One block later, the lock knows that your cryptographic key is the one that should open it. So that's a nice example.
Okay, this is great. Can I just pursue this a little bit further?
Yes.
Because what I really like here is that actually one of the things that we struggle with so much, and I'll thread this in if I can into the sustainability of the artist's vocation as well, is that the land and the earth can extract rent from us much more easily than we can as artists on our audience, like when we charge, for example, to go into a gallery or a museum, for example. And I'm interested in this way that we combine the language of us as humans with the physics of the universe, which is, I can't remember who said it, but someone said, like, code is the new law, right? That human laws are defined by the fact that they can be broken. But what code has the ability to do is just-in-time enforcement. If a law is written in a statute book but is never enforced, it's not a law, it's just literature. Like you just written this thing down and it looks nice and it's great and you can talk about it, but if nobody's out there enforcing it and nobody can build on the future, no one can make plans for the future because they don't know whether or not this law is going to be enforced, particularly when it comes to regulation, then that creates a lot of artificial risk in the environment. I mean, it's not like the world isn't risky enough as it is. So what I find quite promising about the idea of tenancy agreements is that it would completely open source and open up the way in which we negotiate the space that we take up. Because let's face it, there is enough room on this planet right now for every human being to dance on Rhode Island. There's enough room in Texas for every human being on this planet to own their own house, right? And yet we congregate in these really, really tight, confined spaces in cities usually, and the city comes about as because of scarcity of resources. You know, you want to get all your food and all your fuel into one place so that you don't have to distribute it everywhere else. But I actually think that one of the things that we're really lacking, and one of the reasons why the property prices are going up so much, is because we don't belong to where we are. We just want to stick to where we are. We don't want to move. We don't move away from where we grew up, or if we do, we go once when we go to university, particularly in the West, and then we kind of hang around there. And as a result, we're not really moving around. But if you're talking about, you know, these kinds of contracts where I can actually say, right, only let my door open for Rob, right? I only want his private key to be able to gain access to this property. Also, we can negotiate the tenancy agreement itself, including the amount that I have to pay as well on the blockchain too. No, we can iterate every revision to the contract and the terms as we go along in a way that's unfalsifiable, in a way that means that I don't have to go to a court, because the court doesn't stop time. The court doesn't come to you when the law's been broken. But with this technology, we've kind of got the full exposure of the members of the public, right? Anyone can come in and act as an arbitrator in this case.
Yeah, I mean, it was Lawrence Lessig who said code is law, and that was with reference to sort of the web era internet. And I mean, I looked at sort of software licensing, free culture licensing a lot over the last few years, and one of the conclusions that I've come to is that code and law are very, very different. But you know, the law does look like a very simple logical structure, but certainly in common law, So in sort of English and American and sort of other Commonwealth law, it's more like a poetry slam. It's a combination of sort of contradictory texts that require human interpretation. Although there was a law passed in Wales that included some prologue code to make sense of it because it was so complex, but that's the exception rather than the rule. But yeah, I mean, you are right that the contract can be constructed to allow arbitration. So you then reintroduce consumer protection or sort of the ability to deal with abusive landlords or tenants. That's in the contract.
A lot of the problems in court cases. A lot of the problems in court cases are epistemic problems. It's about proving whether or not something actually happened. I mean, it takes quite a while usually to get to the point because before the actual trial begins, most of the activity is actually in the discovery phase of discovering evidence. You know, someone said something in an email, and then you've got to go through that email, and the other person can contest it. And often respondents will often rely on unfalsifiable evidence. You know, just their own testimony, and they hope that you don't call their bluff and call them to the stand and all this kind of thing. There's a lot of politics that goes on. But if as the contract is being negotiated, it is actually all the different iterations are being stamped into the blockchain, then that actually reduces the need for things like expert witnesses and things like this, because fundamentally what the blockchain does is it proves action at a distance, right? It proves that events took place in a certain sequence at a certain time in a way that can't be falsified.
Yeah, and that comes back to the idea of provenance in art, you know, knowing who has owned what. So if you have a way of establishing that sort of a particular artwork was made so many years ago, the person X, Y, and Z have owned it in between, then you can't sort of suddenly discover a new Picasso painting in a milkshake somewhere in home. It's actually an authentic one because, you know, there's no provenance transfer. And I mean, with the smart property, the artwork that really interests me for that is it's called A Tool to Deceive and Slaughter, which is a black box which, when you buy it, you have to agree to plug it into the internet. And then after a little while, it will offer itself for sale on eBay. So this is sort of pre-Ethereum, pre-blockchain. It's just a piece of smart property implemented using existing technology of TCP/IP and eBay. And it works very well. It's an object that, whilst you can buy it and you can own it for a while, you can never finally own it because the object itself is going to offer itself on eBay in a month's time.
And what is the point of this?
It's art. It's what art does. It's a way of pointing your attention, of directing your attention to something that's possible, of something that's a natural product of how the world works, of how our technological world works, something that may not actually be real for everyone just yet, but may soon be real, and of making it something that we can contemplate, and making something we can see, that we can think about, that we can experience.
Yeah.
So it's
Oh, let me just.
Sorry. Yeah. No. It's you know, it's the same as going to see a play, going to see a movie, reading a book, what have you. Way of experiencing something that you would not otherwise be safe to experience, or it would not otherwise be practical to experience, in a way that brings it in an almost real way into the world. It's not as if everyone's computers or washing machines or what have you are offering themselves for sale on eBay, but we have this one object which, as far as we can tell, is an actually existing piece of smart property which is complete control of its own destiny by using technology.
Well, this kind of worries me that we're going into Skynet territory here, though. No, is that if my property can start thinking for itself and it has a consciousness, it can put itself on eBay. I'm starting to really worry. And I know that Charles Hodgkinson said at the Miami conference that he thinks that we should let the technology tell us what to do. And when he said that, I kind of like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't mean it the way I think he might mean it. Like, the thing is, there is an underlying intention that I think that we are barely conscious of, that lies beneath us. Like, remember that we make this technology, but it comes from some desire in us to achieve some aim. So I do worry a little bit about the kind of the science fiction, this kind of transhumanist kind of agenda that a lot of people have. I don't know exactly what Charles meant when he said that. I hope he meant it in a positive way, and that we should be responding and thinking critically about what this technology is making us do. Because when I sit on a train or I'm outside, I see people constantly glued to their iPhones, and what they're doing is they're just staring at a box, and they're staring at information that has been written by someone else. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, it was said by somebody on the BTCE troll box yesterday, that if you can't code, you're going to be put in a concentration camp. Like, not being able to code in the future is going to be like not being able to read and write. That you've almost got this kind of technorati class who will be able to, you know, write these scripts and be able to tell these objects in our world what to do. That you'll almost be baking, they'll be baking their values and their ethics into the physics of our environment. Right, and you're just suddenly going to walk into someone's environment. Someone's just going to set up this environment, this virtual reality for you. You're just going to be glued. You're just going to be sucking up, because you don't know that there's an alternative. You don't know that you can put the screen away, and there is somewhere you can go where you can be kind of in charge of that. I don't want it to get too dystopic. What do you think, Marguerite? Oh, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
I don't know about the concentration camps so much, because I feel like we don't put people that can't read and can't write today in concentration camps. They're just at a disadvantage in participating in society more than anything. But I'm with the smart contracts, and in regards to art, I'm thinking about what is art's purpose going to be at that point? I mean, it's constantly a conversation between us and the human condition, right? That's what art today is trying to do more than anything. And how are we going to capture that when we become so, I mean, when we're cyborgs? How are we going to address that issue, right? Because that now we're bringing in a whole nother realm, and I feel like right now with art in the imagery aspects, like we're using it as code. Rob, you shared with me that YouTube video where it's got sound and rectangles moving around, and it's this idea of we can create lots of noise in stimulus to hide a faint signal that could be, you know, if you have the key, you can unlock for knowledge. And I think as we become more immersed in knowledge sharing, that there's always going to be that battle that we have going back and forth between the people that are fighting for freedom and the people that are trying to control it, the chaos and the order. And there will always be that battle, in my opinion. And as artists, I feel like we're always fighting against the machine. So the machine will be used for those works. It will be used by the evil to control, and it will also be a tool for the artists who are trying to find freedom. And so I think that with this visual stimulation, I think it's still important. Art on the most aesthetic level will still have importance for us as a species, because it can hide information more effectively than in my opinion, than any code. Because code is, a red flag goes up because it says it's encrypted. So there might be something here. But as a raw material and art, you don't know what to look for. It's very ambiguous. And as an artist, you can create something. Yes, you can create a digital file that has the hidden message in the code. You can do that today. But I think that the idea of creating artwork that has the hidden message in the actual creation might be another layer that we haven't really visited that much yet. And that sort of communication, I mean, to go on a tangent, it makes me think of anything from, you know, crop circles and things like that. And I know that's way out there, but ideas of sharing information, visual information that might have huge meanings that we don't have the tools yet to access. And when I think about the contracts and things within Ethereum, and I'm thinking about art, I'm thinking about how do we abstract from this and then talk about the human condition. And so, anyways, to bring that back to you guys.
Well, what I'm thinking is it's almost like art is the virus to the machine. I'm adapting a quote by Umar Haque, who said that love is the virus to the machine, but I would slightly alter that a little bit, because the machine has no way of understanding our art. Like, you can't produce a SHA-1 or a SHA-256 hash of a literal physical work of art, because, I mean, you could do it with a photograph as long as you didn't change anything about that photograph, because of something called the avalanche effect, which is, let's say you write, you know, the cat sat on the mat, and you create a SHA-1 of that, and then you created the cat sat on the mat, and you put a full stop at the end, and you created another SHA-1. Those two hashes will look completely different, not just a little bit different. And this is called the avalanche effect, and it creates a certain asymmetry between the two objects, the digital representation of the object in the hash and the actual embodiment of the object. Well, you can't do that with a sculpture, because you literally need to expend time in order to fully appreciate that work. Like, we were Marguerite and I were looking at Heidegger earlier and his thoughts on art, and he talks about the Greek temple, which at the time when it existed within its community and within its context, it was used as a place of salvation, a place of healing. You know, people would kind of go there and congregate there. But then over the centuries, as it started to decay, because of the architects at the time, particularly actually in Rome with Vitruvius, when they designed their buildings, they designed them for the long term. Like, they actually thought about, what's this going to look like after 1,000 years of weathering and storms and all this kind of thing. And so the artwork degrades gracefully. Like, it's still, in order for the past to be understood, it needs the future, right? It needs to have always the possibility of being understood in a new way by new people in a new context. And I think there's something about this technology that can't really get to that.
Yeah, I mean, the avalanche effect that you mentioned is obviously sort of true not only for digital representations of artwork. If you take a picture of a painting with a phone camera, or you take a picture of a painting with a sort of large format digital camera and then hash the resulting image, then it's going to be completely different. And there's research from the Digital Humanities and Image Search in terms of making stable representations of images, which could be useful for that. But philosophically, yes, it's a very interesting area. I mean, when you were talking earlier about, you know, what happens when machines are in charge, and also the fact that machines are instantiations of our own desires. Machines are made by people in order to do things. The classic science fiction example of that is the old film Forbidden Planet, which I'd have to give the ending away to explain what happens there, but that is very much about a civilization that creates a technology which can do a lot of mystery and what happens as a result of that. But I mean, with being able to represent artworks within cryptographic systems, within the blockchain, within either the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain, this then brings in the idea of ownership, not just for smart property, but in sort of more exotic ways, so sponsorship, the idea of crowdfunding, which is where you sort of, in a way, take ownership of something before it's produced, or even in terms of sort of a fan relation to a movie or a comic book series, where you have an investment in it and have sort of an ownership of it in a way which isn't represented particularly financially. So one of the things that does interest me more practically, I guess, about Ethereum, about smart contracts, is the ability to shake up the ideas of ownership and funding of art, and of sort of ways of bringing that back to artists who kind of do new wings, and who, under the current systems, are often making sort of £10,000, $10,000 a year, and yet are still determined to make art. So sort of how can we shake that up a bit in a way that isn't exploitative and doesn't create a new sort of class of DRM or landlords of the digital forms of property, but which does make it so that people can get paid in interesting ways.
Right. Yeah, let's talk about the sustainability of these lifestyles, because a lot of us now are doing these podcasts, and we're doing you know, these kind of shows, and a lot of work goes on behind the scenes in order to generate these. You know, we have to have, you know, cameras and microphones and all this various equipment, and one of the questions that's come up is, well, how do we make this art that we're producing, because you'd certainly notice if it wasn't here, how would you make this sustainable? because the fact is that my landlord right now can extract more rent from me than I can from my audience, for example. And this is something that we've come up against time and time again. And I put an idea forward on Reddit the other day of a Bitcoin wallet that sits in your browser as a plugin that automatically searches the web pages you view for a Bitcoin or a Feathercoin or Dogecoin address. And then you front load it with cash and you say, right, every month I want to donate, you know, 0.4 Bitcoin to artists and people that I appreciate. And at the end of every day, the software goes through, it says, right, you looked at all these pages, you spent more than half an hour on these websites. If you don't object, I'm going to donate a certain amount. I'm going to divide this up to your chosen artists in order to make it sustainable. Because I think if you start begging for tips, which is what I see happening at the moment on the internet, where we're kind of lowering ourselves and we're saying, oh, you know, please, please, please donate to the show. What you're doing is, you know, people have already appreciated the content. Now they're kind of gone. There's no obligation. But if you do it beforehand, you say, right, you're already going to put the money up front. And here's an easy way for you to make this sustainable. It's not even about profitability, actually. It's about sustainability. How do you keep this artist going? Because we've now got an audience of, you know, something like 3 billion people online. You're going to find it a lot easier in order to, well, my hope is that it will be a lot easier for artists to be able to make a living now.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that people do make keeping arts is kind of at odds with the idea that if you sort of connect everything to the market and the signals go through, people will do what they're incentivized to do. So sort of art is kind of a counterexample.
But what's interesting about the art market is that a lot of, like, the Mona Lisa sold for something like 70 million, but that wasn't a reflection of the actual price of the painting. That was a reflection of the risk involved in things like transportation, and it was basically just a gesture. It was like, look, you know, you can't ship this incredibly priceless piece of artwork that's so vital to our civilization's history and understanding of itself without some kind of token or financial representation. And so maybe the tips mean something very different when we're donating to artists online.
Yeah, I mean, I do like tipping culture, and I mean, I've seen a couple of people starting to implement that idea of sort of searching the page for the Bitcoin address and then tipping to it. That kind of distributed patronage is a very good idea. It's one of the things that you, to a degree, lose if you lose systems like the old recording studio system or Kickstarter. You know, you need a way of getting more than one person to pay for art. Otherwise, you just end up with the art that the king wants, or that the whoever's in charge of the relevant funding body wants. So making it so that people can sort of tip or pay.
Well, that's a very good point. That's a very good point, Rob. In fact, that's a perfect segue to remind people that if you want to donate to this show and make this sustainable, you can donate now using one of these three options. You've got Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and Feathercoin. And these are three of my favorites, just because I think what's most valuable in any currency is its community. I really like what Doge have got going on. I've said that before. Obviously, Bitcoin, that's where, you know, I started out, and then of course my own Feathercoin, who are still working very hard, and we're going to be going up to Hull, hopefully at the end of this week, to showcase our open source point of sale system, which I look forward to telling everyone about. But yes, please do donate. There's also, I put the Bitcoin address in the comments below. And in fact, after our last show, Marguerite, we did actually get some money. We got 99 Dogecoins, and we got, I think it was 1 centi Bitcoin, which is about $6 or $7. So I'll divide that up amongst the people that were on the show. I was going to wait a little bit to see if any more came in, because obviously you pay a little bit of a transaction fee when you do it. But I think it's the you know, the fairest way. I think where we're going though is a kind of a profitless economy. I think we're coming to the end, as I said in my introduction, we're coming to the end of the Industrial Revolution, and it's not that scarcity won't exist. You know, in this kind of new movement, it's just that it will become contextualized on a much broader continuum of abundance, actually, and about, you know, this kind of idea of that you've got all these people, all the different, like, they think about the internet as like all the different ways to appreciate humanity, like all the different ways of being human. And I think when we go online, that's kind of what we're looking for. Where we go online isn't dependent upon economic rent scarcity. It's not based on how much fuel I can put in my car, whether I can afford a plane ticket, or where I grew up. It's based on what I care about. I'm guided by my values. And in some ways, I think that the internet is actually a reorganization. It's almost like we're all in the wrong places, that all these different cultures all over the world have all got something to share with one another. But we've chosen to frame and define a lot of these discussions that we've had based on superficialities like skin color, or like, you know, what version of the Bible you grew up and read, which isn't very interesting if what you're trying to do is develop your understanding of life and yourself. I think one of the reasons we leave home is to rediscover the meaning of our home itself. Like, you actually get closer to your home. I don't know many people that leave home and never go back again, for example. And one of the sort of interesting things about cryptocurrency is a way of us to all agree on how we measure our sacrifices and how to distribute that value across geographies near instantly at near zero cost. Like, that money behaves best when it has no middlemen at all. And in fact, that's probably why the middlemen put themselves there. That's probably why we have this kind of rentier class, this kind of toll booth economy, where people want to put themselves between the object, the desired object, maybe it's an artwork, and the audience. They always want to put themselves in. They always want to get their cut. Why don't you, when you say something, Marguerite, you look like you're thinking some things.
Right. Well, you said that. So I'm thinking about the middleman, and as an artist, there's so many times I just want to create artwork and not even think about being paid for it. That's not, because that's such an afterthought for me as an artist, and I'm sure there's other artists like that. I want to have the impact and to say something, and yes, it is important to pay your bills, but it's distracting for me to put on my artwork a QR code. I find that it takes away from my artwork. It's like, Chris, I was telling you about my Hush series, right? Like the white, quiet. For my thesis show I had in college, it was a series of white paintings that were in layers of different off-whites and glazed in multiple layers. So it almost felt like you were gazing into a cloud. And then I would put little nuances in there also. And sometimes I would put sculptural references, and I would put different elements that were textural. And I had 7 of these, and they were about 7 feet by 8 feet, so they were huge. And they completely encompassed half of the gallery. So if I had put a QR code next to these paintings, it would have been so ostentatious, like so, you know, like, because the work is about being quiet and about wrapping you into a world where you can explore. And then it's like, oh, well, here's this QR code. So that for me is a challenge. I don't know how to be tipped in that sense. And like with these different sketches I've made recently of Andreas and of Julia of Brave the World, if I didn't put QR codes on the images because it would be distracting from the portraits I'm creating. I'm not making these portraits for a tip. I'm not making these portraits for, you know, pay me to do more. That's not the point. The point is I'm trying to capture these incredible things that are happening in this space. And I don't know how to fix that problem. To me, it seems like, therefore, if I were to put any of these images, for example, in the blockchain, I don't know how to attach a way to also monetarily benefit that would somehow take away from what I'm really trying to create as an artist.
Well, the technology isn't quite there yet. What you're looking for is a frictionless payment system where I can pay you at the speed of a thought, right? Like, what I need is something, and okay, I'm going to get into trouble now, a little chip inside of my head, okay, that senses when I'm feeling joy and satisfaction, and so that when I appreciate your art, it says, look, you've already told me that you identify yourself as someone who values this kind of work in the world. Do you want to see more of this in the world? And I've just sensed that you've had a big dopamine hit. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to send Marguerite, you know, a whole Bitcoin for this Hush project, because it's very Rothko-like. When you were talking to me about it, it sounded very immersive. You know, Rothko drew these huge canvases. You were supposed to stand very close. There was a marking on the ground, and you were supposed to it was supposed to just fill up your vision. You know, rather like our fancy, widescreen TVs and our phones do these days. Like people spend a lot of their time not really paying attention. They spend a lot of their time in their heads, and they don't really notice what is right in front of them. And I think that's what a project like yours does. And do talk a little bit about your project with these sort of Bitcoin. I mean, how would you describe them? You painted a picture of Andreas and also Brave the World, Julia, which I brought up earlier. I'm going to go find your one of Andreas, but tell us about that.
I have it. I'll do it.
Okay, cool.
So here's the share screen. So this is Andreas. Do you see it? Yes. There's Andreas, and I'm trying to capture the essence of Andreas here. I mean, I started with Andreas in the series because he is he's such a light to me, and he took the time to sit down with me and talk about the blockchain design pattern, which Andreas is so busy. I couldn't believe that he actually did that. That blew my mind, and gave me an hour, almost 2 hours of his time to talk about this. And so he was the first person I wanted to do because he had just an incredible impact on me as an artist, and the fact that here's someone that's on the forefront for all of us, always, talking to the media about the different things within the community that are happening, and he comes to the rescue. I don't know how many times, and we have people get mad. I experienced when I put this on Reddit, the response was incredible because people are mad that I guess there's such an identity, maybe with with a thought leader within the space. So I understand that because I know that Bitcoin represents many, many, many people. But so I started this series with him because for me it was significant. So I did him, and then I did Julia, who of Brave the World.
One of the things that I think Andreas represents for me is he gives us all, certainly for me, he guides me a little bit. Like if I'm stuck on a particular area of thinking, and bear in mind that many tragedies in history have been due to a failure of thinking, where people haven't think critically. Whenever I get like that, I just put on one of his videos, and suddenly I'm like, some clarity, I can actually get myself into a bit of a groove. And I can often end up in very different places, but he just gives me that starting point. Talk to us about Julia. I don't know much about her. I discovered her Bitcoin, was it her Constitution? Bitcoin Constitution, and when I saw that, I just absolutely loved it, and I tweeted the hell out of it, and I told people to, send her money,
Right. That's so I used the text from that on the back of this piece of Julia, and I loved her because she uses these stills in her in a lot of her videos. She's famous for her YouTube videos. She's an anarchist and also a Bitcoiner. And all of these expressions that are not, she's beautiful. She's such a gorgeous woman, and she uses these expressions that are very much like expressive and not about the traditional media that you see of beautiful women. So I love that she takes the opportunity to do that, and she also is an incredible creative thinker and writer. So she writes all of her own scripts for all of her own videos and memorizes them and delivers them in such a raw manner that is from her heart and genuine. And for many people, again, Bitcoin does not, the space is for everyone, and for her, she represents a certain group that, she speaks to a certain group who believe in the ideas of anarchy and freedom. I think she's is it capital anarchist or I don't. Anyways,
anarcho-capitalist, I think.
Yes, right. So, anyways, she's on the forefront doing this. She was just at the Bilderberg conference that just happened, and she was there recording live. And I think she went there mostly on tips from her supporters. So she's in the field and active, and she has addressed multiple times she's addressed the lack of women in the space. But also, I like her ideas behind the reasons for this. And so she's incredible to just explore as out of complete interest. You don't have to agree with everything she says, but it's interesting.
Exactly. That's the thing, is that too much of political dialogue is bogged down in, sort of partisanship. And we just automatically disagree with someone if they're a Marxist, for example, and we don't listen to anything. We're not ready to give up any of our old knowledge, and yet we can't go forward unless we forget. Right? You have to forget your way into the future, and that has something to do with speed. It has a lot to do with humility and needing to be able to step back and not need to be right. And it's something that I struggle with all my time, because my ego is constantly competing with the real me, the me that just wants the truth. But then I also need to protect myself when I go out and I do these videos and I meet people at meetups. I need to be able to shield myself to some extent. I need to be able to tell myself a story about myself. And you raised the issue of gender, which I want to go into, because there's a really good video by Jenna Marbles where she talks about the hidden secrets of how women make their boobs look good. And I love this video because I get so much insight from it. As a guy, but she has this thing where she's like, you got to put on 2 bras, right? So this is what I say now, I'm putting on my 2 bras, and what I mean by that is I've got my own, I've got my own breasts, I've got my own boobs to kind of show. I want to just represent myself as best as I possibly can. It's not necessarily about lying to anyone. I don't want to defraud anyone. I don't want to tell people I am a certain way and then I'm not. But there's a certain it's also similarly related in the art of Zen and motorcycle maintenance. I'm thinking of Persick's notion of gumption, just going out there and doing it. The starting part is the hardest part, and going out there with such gusto. I noticed in some of her videos, I only recently discovered who she was. Some of the videos, they aren't absolutely perfect. You can see there are other YouTubers that have much higher production standards. She does some of them in her garden and things like this. But it's really what grabs you is how interesting it is and how thought-provoking it is. And really what we need to be doing right now is we need to be saying, well, look, the things that used to work just aren't working anymore. So we've got to open ourselves up to new and interesting ideas. I don't care how this person identifies themselves, whether they identify themselves as a libertarian or a communist or liberal or whatever. What I'm interested in is getting underneath that surface. There's a really good quote by Alexander Nehamas, and I tweeted it out the other day. Actually, it's from Entitled Opinions, where he says, beauty is a promise that something like what lies beneath its surface will in some way improve your life. But the beauty itself is not a Kantian object. It doesn't guarantee that what lies behind it is going to deliver on what it says it is. You're just going to have to use your intuition for that. So, we put on these faces, we get dressed every morning, and we try to think about, who am I going to meet this day? Is today the day that I put on the nice shoes? Do I put on my best shirt? Because you don't have to wait for it to go, you want to put it in the laundry and then it's going to be another 2 days until you get to wear it again. So you kind of we're constantly thinking about how we get to look, and I'm interested in this kind of relationship because a good start is half the way there. If you do have that kind of initial impression, and people do this all the time on YouTube, they always put some sexy looking woman as the main avatar picture as a way of designing, it's designed to get you to click on it, that kind of link bait. But I think what's called for right now is a bit more authenticity, right? That we're very, very good at recognizing when we're being cheated. If someone does that once, it's okay, I'm probably not going to trust you so much again. But if we can get this right balance between the marketing and the actual execution, I think she has that in spades. The stuff that she did at Bilderberg was so good. And maybe what you're getting to is what lies beneath that veneer. Right, you're trying to get underneath the surface. I'd actually like to see you do another, or maybe some more of Andreas. I actually think that he deserves a triptych or something like that, because he has this kind of energy and this passion as well that I feel needs to be represented, where he kind of comes alive now.
Right, I do want to revisit Andreas. There's some, because Andreas also, in addition to his passion and his seriousness that's behind Bitcoin, he's funny. He has a humor and a personality, another side that is just alive, and that part. All of us, we see him worn down and bogged down and tired a lot. There's those times when he was on the Joe Rogan show and he was just completely alive, or the picture of him with the hammer. That's kind of pretty famous, where he's licking the hammer and making a Miley Cyrus reference, but also of the girls that are I'm into Bitcoin, give me money. That was happening at that time. I missed that, Andreas, and it's not his fault. He's just really tired, I think. And I know I'm speaking for him inappropriately because I don't know him to that extent, but I can imagine that. I just want to recapture that humor that he has, because I think that that's important too. He is very human, and I think that, I mean, when I think of my artwork right now, I understand a little bit of it is motivated by propaganda, because I am into Bitcoin and I love the ideas behind it. So to address the audience in the most effective way, I feel like I need to touch on ideas that, yes, they're in a way propaganda, because I'm saying, look at this stuff that's really cool, and I really like it. You know, it's not abstract. It's not asking a question necessarily, which is the artwork I prefer more so. I prefer to go to a gallery and to be shown something and to explore even myself in a way. And I feel like this artwork is not quite there yet, but it's an introduction. It's an introduction to Bitcoin art for me, in a way that, let's talk about all the characters in this space that are incredible and important and layered and dynamic. That's why I think Andreas deserves, like you said, more than one piece. He's very dynamic, but there are many people that have these same traits. And women also. There's talk that there's not enough women in this space, and while that might be true, there are very influential women that do exist, and they do deserve attention too. And so will always be a work in progress, but hopefully I can also make work that is more exploratory. And while it might not have the utility value of spreading the idea in such a forefront way that a propaganda piece might, it might be historically something more significant for people that are trying to understand what we were experiencing at the time.
I don't think propaganda is the right term, just because of its associations, like with Nazism and so on. But I think that Bitcoin does need everyone. Like, it needs, you know, all of us to be able to participate in this. And I think that once members of the public start to see the artwork and the generativity, which is what art really, you know, means to me, it's about turning your pain into something that really matters, right? That you're going to suffer for this, and then you're going to be able to produce something. I mean, Rob, what do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, I think the production of icons of iconography and portraiture of important historical roles for art. So, I mean, the fact that these people have a social or an ideological status or role within the Bitcoin or crypto communities, which may not be obvious outside those communities, is something that sort of art can do useful work on. So there's nothing wrong with painting pictures of people you like or you think are awesome. That's a very useful thing for art to do. In terms of sort of how this relates to propaganda, I mean, if you look at the art produced after the Russian Revolution, or the art produced by the Catholic Church, the role that art performs there is to sort of show the world that everyone knows ideologically must be there or must be coming, but isn't yet, to show it and maybe to resolve any problems with how people are thinking about it before they actually get there. But there's also, even when people are working on such straightforward art of, you know, the future or of particular ideology, there's always other work that artists are doing in there, be it personal interests, be it ideology that's at odds with the party line. So there's always useful and interesting work for artists to do, whether it's straightforward portraits, whether it's straightforward illustrations or raw visualizations of the world to come, particularly ideologically, or whether they're using that as a framework for their own ideas or the exercise of their own skill. To go back to studying the art of motorcycle maintenance, the quality, the sort of irreducible idea of quality. You know it when you see it. You don't know what it is ahead of time. That's really what art is for. It's for that thing that is not immediately reducible to the current totalizing value system. You know, you don't know what it is. But
Yeah, quality. Pirsig describes quality, or Phaedrus, the alternative character in there. It describes it as an event that happens. that this is something that happens to you, and it's not something like I couldn't just you couldn't just learn how to do motorcycle maintenance by reading the manual. He says, like, you've actually got to watch somebody do it. You've got to grok it. You've got to empathize and understand it as someone else does. And when he's trying to teach his students how to write, was it a great essay? Well, the way he did it was that he gave them examples of great essays, and he just kept showing them, and he just kept showing them. And what you were supposed to do is you were supposed to assimilate this through your experience. You were supposed to go, okay, I get this. I kind of see how this is working. I often use the example that, you know, David Beckham, when he plays football, doesn't have to have a belief about the football before he kicks it. He just kicks the damn thing. Right, all of the boundaries and the barriers in his way, they just completely disappear. And and I know I'm quite Heideggerian as it is, but you know, he becomes his world existingly, like he becomes part of the liquid changing environment as he's kind of flowing around. And just as you were talking there, I was showing people the BTC art gallery, some of the user generated art that people have donated, and was that really good quote from Stefan Molyneux, where it's like, you know, Bitcoin is the weapon that makes people think. You know, that is your tool. Actually, you are picking Bitcoin up like any tool in your environment, like the football on the football pitch, and you are using it as an object, as a social object to sort of gather around. A social object could be like a hearth, or it could be the campfire, it could be a football game, right? The way we coordinate ourselves in society isn't just based around the people that we grew up with or the friends that we have. It's based around our common interests. And this should be very prevalent to us and very apparent because of the way Facebook is treating our activity. It has something called the interest graph, where it looks at what you say you have liked. In fact, the like button is now becoming a currency. And I think what Satoshi really intended with, and particularly when Hal Finney started coming in on the conversation, was that actually this is more than just a currency, in the sense that everything has currency, in the sense that to some degree everything is portable to some extent, divisible to some extent, and fungible to some extent. That once a commodity, a commodification, once a substance, just kind of looking around, you know, like this glass, that it has currency in the sense that everything can flow, and that what you're looking for when you're trying to come up with a global monetary system, a way for us to you know, send our economic energy around, to abstract away a lot of our past activities and to send it somewhere else. What you're looking for, something that embodies all of those qualities, something that everyone can come together around and unite and say, yes, I find this valuable too. And I don't think that this is a finished experiment. I still think that we've got a very long way to go, because some of the incentive structure, particularly at the moment with the mining, is, you know, going out to all the ASIC manufacturers. It will be really interesting to see whether or not the miners just say, you know what, this isn't, you know, why are we even mining this stuff? Because mining is a zero-sum game. We don't know. It could be that in 5 to 10 years' time, you know, that we look back at this blockchain technology and we look back at it like we did CB radios in the 70s. Do you remember when everyone was really into those and you used to call up your friends and say how many candles you're burning? I mean, I don't remember. I wasn't alive, but I do remember growing up around those stories, and people would sort of talk about this like how quaint it was. But it was like a prototypical version of the internet. And I wonder, like, just as a basic thought experiment, I'm borrowing this from Tunnel Vision, but what will we remember in 10, 20 years' time? Will we remember Lady Gaga, or will we remember Bitcoin?
But I want to say, according to this, so you say that art is, you know, it needs to be relevant at the time. You were implying that an artist can be elevated according to their social relevance of the time. And while that may be true in a lot of cases, I think we have many instances in the past of artists who weren't realized until after their time. And so that problem will probably still exist, that the monetary issue with an artist. But I mean, think of Jules Verne and people that were ahead of their time, you know, addressing issues that we couldn't yet conceive. And that's the thing about dreamers and many artists, is that, you know, they're trying to bring attention to, and while it's subtle at first, those ideas are a seed planted, and then they grow over time, and then they become its own subculture eventually. And I mean, just like we were talking, Chris, earlier about Van Gogh, and from his impressionistic work, that became an entire series of works that many artists then realized they could make work about, because it didn't have to be accurate portrayals, or it didn't have to be a certain style. It could be a new portrayal, and that endeavor will, I don't think that will ever change, because it's constantly a contrast between us as artists, people, and the human condition. And as we are advancing at this ever increasing rate, like, you know, we were saying cyberpunk and cyborgs in 200 years, when we're there, I would be very interested to see what that art looks like, because I'm sure people will be commenting on that human condition.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we were talking specifically about an essay that Martin Heidegger wrote called "The Origin of the Work of Art," and his famous example, is "The Pair of Shoes" by Vincent van Gogh, and the way in which he wants to draw our attention to the way in which that we don't pay attention to the materials that it's made of or any other kind of literal things. What we're paying attention to is what it must have been like to have worn these shoes, right? That you are combining you are bringing your experience from this piece in, and you are understanding it. You are understanding what that person must have been. Another example that may be easier to explain is that there is something I have in common with the guy that invented this chair, right? The first person to invent the chair, he was kind of rooting around. It's like, I want something that's kind of chair-like, you know. And people are already sitting, and they're already noticing that certain objects in their environment, I mean, we're probably talking tens of thousands of years ago, that some objects in their environment have certain affordances. Some things are better at sitting on than others. And over time, people start to get better at making predictions about what would be good to sit on and what would not be good to sit on. They have their own memory. They're able to record a lot of these experiences and recall them later just at the right time. They were able to say, yeah, I think this stone is much better for sitting on than that spike, you know, the spiky area over there. And then what happens is you get this sort of introduction of culture, where we start to pass down some of these teachings to the point where the culture transcends us and actually starts to live outside of the sort of iterative cadence of birth and death, that we actually exist as a species, as a human species. We exist between mortality and immortality, that we are able to give ourselves longevity, not just literally and genetically by having children, but by also having a lasting impression, by creating something, by taking some substance like a piece of paper and then drawing on it and leaving its mark, and so that becomes durable, so that someone else later on in a slightly different, similar but different context can pick it up and re-understand it in the same way that you can with Van Gogh's painting, that you can kind of understand what it must have been like to have been a peasant just by looking at those shoes.
I mean, this is the idea of art as communication and as a sort of an assertion of existence, of the artist saying that I lived, I existed, I had these experiences and communication with them to other people. And this comes back to the idea of Bitcoin or Ethereum, have you as a medium for communication and a means of people identifying themselves and communicating between each other. So that sort of interests me as a way of relating them back together. But so, I mean, certainly with something like Van Gogh, it's regarded as singular. It's regarded as a singular expression of the human condition, or of the human spirit, if we're speaking of Heidegger. And you know, I don't know what art at the moment could be looked back on in 100 years' time and said to be a similar expression of contemporary human spirit, because I don't have that perspective. We don't have that perspective, so it's kind of difficult to say. Although it's always a useful thought experiment.
Well, a lot of people, I think, are trading on these platforms, not realizing that all of these databases will at some stage be liberated, because the word internet means inter-network, like it's a network of networks. And I think a lot of people forget that they are making history right now. Like, as you are on these exchanges, you are trading, all of that's going to be recorded somewhere in a database, and at some point this exchange is going to be hacked, or the hard drive's going to end up, you know, being taken out somehow. Somebody's going to get a hold of it, and so long as that information is valuable to someone somewhere, that data will be liberated. And if you can send money anonymously across the internet now, using one of these more anonymized currencies, then there will always be a dark market there that will provide a demand. So I think to finish up today, I want to draw our attention to Theo Goodman in the Q&A section, who's actually been typing out and has been helping us out. It was in fact an anarcho-capitalist, I think he's saying, when we were talking about Julia. But I want to pick up on one question that he's asking. Maybe Rob, you can address this. He says, I want to create a sound chain, a website that creates sound according to the action on the blockchain. It could be based on the hashes or the size of the transaction, kind of like communication by drums between communities. I do believe there already is something called Listen to Bitcoin, is there not? Do either of you know about that? Let me go look that up whilst you're...
I'm not familiar with Listen to Bitcoin. There's a distributed music group called the Cypherpunks, who have their own cryptocurrency, which serves as sort of stock in both band or rewards for engagement in band called Funk. I mean, with Facecoin, that takes a toy blockchain and then visualizes the hash for each block as a bitmap, which it then looks for faces in. It'd be relatively trivial to do the same with music, in the same way that people sonify the human genome or stock market data or any arbitrary piece of data. So that sounds like a very good internet radio station, particularly with lots of blockchains.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like smoke signals. And also, I've had this conversation with Travis Savo at Feathercoin. He talks a lot about the TCP protocol being, applied to anything. Actually, you can apply it to smoke signals. You can apply it to bongos. The entire infrastructure that the internet is based on can be communicated over TCP. That this isn't something that is unique to our civilization with all of its plastics and its metals and things like that. It's just a protocol. It's a standard for behavior.
Yes, there's the RFC that covers transmitting TCP by carrier pigeon. So
right.
Yeah, that's definitely the case.
But I don't think that's being communicated very well to members of the public. Like just in the same way that the blockchain, its true essence as a distributed timestamp server, as a way of communicating action at a distance, much in the same way that telescopes did, much the same way that Morse code, the alphabet, papyrus paper, the printing press. I mean, all of these groundbreaking revolutions in communications fundamentally changed the people whose ideas got to be expressed. It was ready for a new, group of people from different class structures, different backgrounds, in order to be able to communicate themselves. No.
Yeah, it's the idea of an enabling technology, which is J. David Walter's book Turing's Man. It's the idea that people think of themselves in terms of the dominant technology of the age. So when ceramics and pottery were the dominant idea, people made of clay, and steam engineer it, people sort of things are being run by steam. The brain is an electrical device, the brain is a computing device. And if the blockchain becomes that prevalent, people will think of themselves as entries on the blockchain or an iteration of the blockchain. But also the way that kind of technology does affect people. I mean, you mentioned people glued to their mobile phones earlier. And before they were glued to their mobile phones, they would have been sat on the subway reading a newspaper or reading a book. And literature affects the human capacity for sympathy. The news makes us more informed and more worried. These technologies do affect what it means to be human and how human beings communicate.
And we've also got a question here. This will be the last one. I don't think we have any others. What do we think about Next, NXT coin? Is that relevant to what we were discussing? I mean, it's a so-called forged coin, 100% proof of stake, but there have been some criticisms of the proof of stake as opposed to actual hashing, because when you're actually committing a computer to hash on the network, you're actually sacrificing energy and time to do that. Like your computer is switched on, it can't be doing anything else realistically, and it's going to be using up a lot of its processing power, which is going to cost electricity, whereas NXT, the way you enforce the network is by actually owning coins. So you can have coins in a wallet, and you can just leave your wallet switched on, and it's generating new coins in exchange for you securing the network, and I think you're also processing the payments in a similar way that the proof of work mining happens on Bitcoin. Is that right, Rob?
I must confess I don't know that much about NXT. I've got the software installed.
Okay.
And the asset registry obviously interests me greatly from the point of view of being able to represent ownable entities on the blockchain, but I've only just started looking into it. I was looking at coloured coins before, which are a way of getting, I believe, similar representations of assets, but on the Bitcoin blockchain rather than requiring a new blockchain. But I mean, I'm interested in XT, but I've been concentrating on Ethereum programmable, and the programmability is what drew me to.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. I mean, a lot of these are very experimental, and there was something that Gavin Andresen said in the State of the Union at the Bitcoin conference, which is that you can't write secure code unless there's something valuable at stake. That the only way you really get to find out whether or not you're writing good sanitized code is when you've actually got some real money that you've got to lose. And I think all of these cryptocurrencies, as long as they're well intentioned, as long as the founders actually want to follow through and are committed in the long run, I think they're all very worthy, and I think they all have a place, because they can take risks that Bitcoin can't, and they can also form smaller, more niche communities in a way that enables individuals to have more of an impact. I mean, we certainly had that at Feathercoin, where we had a number of graphic designers that came forward that really liked the motif of the feather, which, if you think about it, has actually got more potential than just the letter B, because there's also motifs that you can do with birds, and there's different ways of stylizing the feather and this kind of thing, that actually you could get really, really creative with it. So I'm just thinking maybe we should move on to some final thoughts. Marguerite, what are you thinking after all of this in summation?
Well, as far as the NXT goes, Bitcoin has so many forks that NXT is one of the only. I mean, there's very few entities that are completely like self-reliant, that are not on the blockchain. And NXT is one of them. I think that's interesting, especially as an artist. And I think this is where I get biased on all the altcoins, is because I love creativity. So even if it's like a copycat coin, the methods that people take to promote their idea, or I'm going to use this coin this way, and this is how I think it should be used, I'm so interested in that. And it's not that I'm trying to, on Twitter, I'm not trying to like send off all these altcoins like, yes, this is the future of money. It's more that like this is really cool that people are doing this, and I'm really interested in that behavior, because that creativity is taking us to new levels. It's that interaction, it's that social aspect of the currency that we didn't anticipate. I don't think 2 years ago we said Bitcoin's really going to be amazing because it's going to have this incredible subculture to carry it through. I mean, this altcoin subculture is part of Bitcoin. That is part of the movement, and that's going to be a part of. I mean, in my eyes, that's a part of art making also. Like, if future assets, putting them into the blockchains that might not have the utility that a coin does, but might be interesting also. So that dialogue is evolving right before our eyes every single day. Every week, I feel like I have to sit down for a few hours every day and understand what's happening, because it is happening so fast. And I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I'm constantly amazed at the work people are doing.
Yeah, you're totally right, and it's going to get to the point where the information is going to get so prevalent that you're actually going to end up becoming localized on the net, just based on the particular topics that you're following, because it's going to be impossible. And in some ways, when I was talking to Pierre Bell on Twitter the other day, I said that actually another way of looking at the proliferation of these blockchains is to say that this is the financialization of language and values, as well as saying that they're forking the code. It's also another way of saying it is that actually what people are doing is chasing after namespaces. It's a little bit like the .com boom, when everyone was trying to get, like, I know the guy that got restaurant.com, for example, and he sold that, and people were just going, it was a land grab, and we often describe, people in this space often describe the internet as like the next continent that we've discovered, but that it's a virtual continent, that it has a different topology, and that really all we've done is shine a light on a very, very small part of it. So at the moment it looks like grass, right? Because that's all we can see. But as we kind of move out into the further reaches of it, we're going to find sand, we're going to find, you know, different, you know, mountains, we're going to find rivers, we're going to find different things. People have to remember that Bitcoin fundamentally is the internet. The internet is still in a state of becoming, just like art for me isn't finished. Like, I don't think we can ever really define art. You know, we're stuck in something called the hermeneutic circle, where in order to understand the whole, you have to understand the parts. But in order to understand the parts, you have to understand the whole. And in Heidegger's essay, the one that we showed earlier on the origins of art, he actually comes to the summation, well, it's easier just to understand the piece. That rather than trying to step back to try and get the bigger picture, what you're better off doing is just focusing on a very, very small area and trying to get the most out of that. That actually, to quote Pirsig again from the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, that being interested is what keeps the world going round. That actually, in order to be interesting to other people, you have to be interested, and you have to look closer and keep asking and be curious. And that's why I'm somewhat skeptical about a lot of the people that are getting into the movement at the moment, that they're just taking a lot for granted. Nobody's looking at the code. I don't know anyone who does. Rob, actually, I would like to do more work with you after this show, because I see that you do display the code on your webpage, and you do have an appreciation for aesthetics. And I actually said to Gavin Wood, who's the developer at Ethereum, when I met him in London, that we should do a video where he actually shows lay people how to start writing some of these smart contracts. I mean, what would you say, and also in your final thoughts, please, on art and Bitcoin?
I mean, showing the code is important, and that's I've got a background in free software, so that's what I've evolved to. I mean, I was just struck by what he was saying about, you know, how can we tip or pay for paintings without being intrusive, and I just look forward to a near future where something that isn't as intrusive as Google Glass can be used to wander around the gallery, track your attention. When you like something, tip the artist, and then you're some of the way towards Cory Doctorow's like you might be there, which is a sort of mid-future system which tracks attention and interest and approval and rewards people the score based on that. And I think that kind of automation, because a lot of these systems are about the automation of contracts, of financial systems, of incentive systems, being able to automate that and get it out of the way is going to be quite powerful. I mean, there are already artists doing projects where, you know, with a sort of one of those EEG headsets that you attach to your head and the Android camera.
I've seen those. There's one called the Muse.
Yeah, it automatically likes things on Facebook. And obviously, you don't want to be trying that. You don't want to be wearing that all day. But when it's simpler to do,
What if you're looking? What if you're stalking an old friend and you're looking through their pictures, and it likes a picture, and then they know that you're looking through all their old pictures? That's disastrous.
Well, if you're creeping people, then you probably deserve what you're getting. But no, I mean, you know, once you can wander into a gallery and we've solved the perceptual hashing problem, and you know, it's not going to accidentally send all of our Dogecoin to a Picasso that we're completely amazed by.
Well, you know what we need is we need better financial management software that actually helps us manage. That should be being worked on right now. Someone needs to work on a Bitcoin wallet that actually helps you manage your personal finances, so that you can set logic and rules and say, look, I don't want to spend any more on content than this amount per month, because it's all about trying to be remembered as the person that you want to be. You want to become the person you want to be remembered as. Sorry, I think that's a quote from Socrates. Like, you want to very, very gradually, slowly become the person that you want civilization to remember you as. And I think that's very, very important here. Well, look, guys, it's been really, really cool. Rob, we're going to have to get you back on again, because some of this stuff is really, really interesting. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the World Crypto Network Twitter account. you should definitely follow us. It's at World Crypto Net. And also, I want to know from you whether or not you think Lady Gaga will be more famous than Bitcoin in 10 to 20 years' time. Like, just how much longevity does this technology have anyway? But for now, thank you very much for your attention and spending time with us today. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.